up my appetite. Don't leave me here high and dry. Baby, you give me ice and fire. You're channeling wind and rain. You're some kind of butterfly. Baby, you give me midnight. You whip up my appetite. Don't leave me here high and dry. Oh, oh.
Your microphone doesn't seem to be on.
My light's on, and my mic.
I'm not hearing you.
That looks good. All right, Jim Marston here, calling to order the meeting of the Access Advisory Committee. Raymond, can you have a roll call?
Chair James Marston,
Here.
Vice Chair Robert Burnham, Skylar Kovich,
Here.
Nick Kuntz,
Here.
Karen Luckett,
Here.
Michael Rasler,
Here.
Suzanne Tejada,
Here.
Councilmember Oscar Gutierrez, Brian Damore,
Here.
Daniel Henschke, Sarita King. Thank you.
Okay, the next item is committee member reports and staff announcements. I have a few things I want to throw out. I want to thank Karen Luckett for all her time and energy and money spent on trying to get accessible seating for people with disabilities, especially wheelchairs, at both the Solstice and the Fiesta. I won't go into detail, but I was down there. I would say there's about 60 people under the 4 awnings. She got extra parking spots at the downtown, at the waterfront. I would say there's about 60 people there. And the one thing that stuck out to me was I sat next to Grace Fisher and talked to her and her mother, and it turned out that was the only time she's been able to go to a parade all the time she's lived in town. So I thought that was a very good thing. So thank you, Karen, for all your work there.
If I may, Chair, I'd like to add to that and, really recognize and acknowledge Karen single-handedly, almost single-handedly reaching out to the residents and the community at Hillside, making sure that they had an opportunity to attend both those events, the Fiesta and the Solstice parades, and it was wonderful and a tremendous experience and something that they appreciate, they look forward to, and it's one of the really special things in our community when it works. When we make the right connections and the community members that, more than most of us, really need somebody to be their advocate. They need somebody looking out for them. They need to know that there's a shaded area where they can actually go and be able to participate and with the rest of the community in our community. And Karen, you just have done a magnificent job. It's really a pleasure and an honor, and I want to make sure that you are acknowledged for that. Thank you, Chair.
Sure.
I agree, and I want to express similar sentiments. I was completely blown away by the effort and success, and I don't know what more to say, but thank you.
Yes. Okay, next item.
Can I add one thing? It was a lot of work, and hopefully with the Parks and Recreation presentation and permitting process, the special events people can organize it on their own if it is part of the permitting process. So we'll go into detail more, but on my part, I have one of the biggest gifts I've received in my life was this thank you from Hillside, from the residents, and I'm going to share this little booklet with everyone, including the special events coordinator. But this is one of the most heartfelt gifts I've ever received in my life, and it put me in tears because they were so happy to be able to come to a parade for the first time in their life, many of them. And I think that's our purpose here as a committee is to get accommodations for, equal accommodations, equal access for the disabled in our community.
Thank you, Karen. That was a wonderful thing you got. In the next couple of weeks, there'll be a call for new member applications for this committee. There's 4 of us who are termed off at the end of this December, so make sure, Sarita said she would send it out to us, but don't forget it. If you want to join back up, you have to reapply.
Who are the 4?
That would be Karen, Bob, Skylar, and myself.
Okay,
But you should check the agenda
right?
or the roster on the website, but I'm sure that's it.
But, wait, when does the application process begin?
It's on, Skylar.
It should be starting within the next 2 weeks.
Okay.
Skylar, your light is on. You're just a little too far away from the microphone.
Oh, I guess it kind of, oh, yeah, it was got kind of farther. Okay.
Okay, and I have one more thing. Last week for National Disability Independence Day, the city did a proclamation, and Bob Burnham went to it. I wasn't in town. And they gave us this nice little proclamation. And Brian says, is there anyone here who would like to take it home with them? We don't know what to do with it. So would anyone like to have the proclamation?
We can put it up at Hillside.
Okay, that would be a good place. Okay, thank you. And are there any staff announcements at this time?
No.
Okay. And Sarita has asked me to remember to please try to state your name before you talk so she can do the minutes better. So I know it's always hard to remember, but anyway, try to speak your name before you talk. This is Jim Marston talking. Okay. Okay. It's now time for public comments for anyone who has comments that are not on the agenda that wish to speak.
Yes,
Yes.
There are 2 public comments, the first being Nancy Capone.
Good morning. My name is Nancy Capone, and I've been a resident of downtown Santa Barbara since 1992. I'm very concerned with the proposed removal of the parking loop at De La Guerra Plaza because it will prevent citizens with mobility issues from attending city council meetings and public gatherings. Over the years, I've been able to park in the green 15 minutes.
One second, sorry. Again, the mic is on.
Okay, thank you.
I'll read it later.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry about that, go ahead.
Can you hear me now, Sarita? Yes. Great, thank you. Good morning, my name is Nancy Capone, and I've been a downtown resident since 1992. And I'm very concerned with the proposed removal of the parking loop at De La Guerra Plaza because it will prevent citizens with mobility issues from attending city council meetings and public gatherings. Over the years, I've been able to park in the green 15-minute zone on the loop to access city council meetings and important civic events. Blue placard holders are allowed to park in green zones without time limits. I've attended planning meetings about the proposed De La Guerra Plaza redesign and raised this issue repeatedly, and it seems that accessible parking hasn't been a priority. I always ask where the new blue parking will be located after the removal of the entire parking loop, and there has never been an answer. I attended a City Hall open house event at De La Guerra Plaza earlier this summer, and the barriers to access were very discouraging. Driving down Anacapa Street, I saw barricades on De La Guerra Street. Searching for accessible event parking, I drove carefully around the barricade and proceeded slowly down De La Guerra. all of the street parking was blocked off with no parking tow-away signs. The parking loop was completely blocked off, and I spoke to the police there who were very nice to me. They directed me to park in the blue handicap spaces in the city staff parking lot, so I followed their instructions and was finally able to attend the event. The problem with the city staff parking lot is that all blue parking spaces are reserved for staff until 6 p.m., according to the signage. Is it possible to have a few blue spaces in that large parking lot designated for public use? Could part of De La Guerra Street between Anacapa and State be designated for blue and green accessible parking? With State Street unfortunately closed down, it's become increasingly difficult to participate in the civic life when De La Guerra Plaza is also closed down to traffic. And I really hope the city can come up with a fair solution so the entire community can feel welcome to join in the vibrant life of our town. And I would just always like to end on a positive note. So I just want to thank you all again for the addition of the blue parking spaces on cross streets next to State Street intersections. And we use these often to access the art museum, galleries, theaters, and restaurants. And I want to thank each of you for your ongoing advocacy to ensure equal rights for the disability community in Santa Barbara. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. Brian, can you address any of those issues, or you or Derek, or about the staff parking lots?
I'll share these comments with Brad Hess, who's the principal project manager for the De La Guerra Plaza project. And I'll also talk to Derek about some options in the interim to improve accessibility parking adjacent to City Hall.
Okay, thank you.
Chair Marston, this is Nick Kuntz. I'd like to follow up with a couple of comments of my own on this subject. As I will detail in my sidewalk ad hoc subcommittee report, we did discuss on-street blue parking on De La Guerra Street, since we're losing it on De La Guerra Circle. And Derek Bailey was looking into that already. It hadn't occurred to me to also ask to add green curbs, and I think we should. But I also had the exact same experience that Ms. Capone had with the city parking lot on the Public Works event day when the loop was closed. And I was ticketed for parking there, although that was written off. I do think that we need to be looking at the policy on that parking lot. There may have been a time when it made sense to reserve all of that handicap parking for staff only, but I have a sense that most of that handicap parking is vacant most of the time. I don't think we have a staff need for all of that to be reserved for staff. And I think that the city should reconsider its policy to facilitate engagement of the disabled members of this community in the meetings that happen in City Hall.
Thank you, Nick. Okay, Cassandra?
And before we begin, if I could ask City TV, there is a piece of paper in front of Chair James Marston that the member of the public would like. James, if you could leave it on the table, that way City TV can zoom in on it.
Okay. Is that in the right orientation?
I believe so.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Cassandra Ensberg, and I'm an architect here in Santa Barbara for over 35, well, I've lived here for over 35 years. I've been an architect since 1996. I am here to support all of you and your efforts for accessibility for our entire community, and I applaud all of your work and appreciate each and every one of you very much. I'm here there's so much to talk about, but I only have 5 minutes, so I am here to speak specifically about the accessibility in the form of a accessible trolley, a bus, or a shuttle that I believe is absolutely needed on State Street 3 years ago. To have the equivalent experience, once the city changed the form of our public right-of-way known as State Street, many people were eliminated from equal access to that street in the form of, I'll call it, just strolling down the street. For people who don't have the ability to either walk or ride a skateboard or a bicycle, some sort of public transportation is required. The private automobile does serve that function, but once that was taken away, nothing else was brought into to replace it. I've been advocating for this trolley, and that's what this image is that I brought today. I sent this image to Ms. Tejada and also to Mr. Kuntz. It shows a trolley it's a small bus, but it's the type that I think we've all experienced at different airports that has the automatic sliding out ramp, and it's very easy. It doesn't take a lot of time, and you can very easily get onto the bus, and there's places in the bus that are clear to be able to sit. I believe that all of the trolleys should be equipped with this type of equipment, not some kind of special lift or anything else, but something that's really easy to get on and off, and that it should be, there should be no special arrangements required. So every single trolley should be going both up and down the street, and it should have this type of access so that all of us, including people with mobility issues, can easily get on and off the bus. So this one was one I just took a picture of it, and I kind of colored it up. It sort of has a bit of a merry prankster look about it, but it could simply be painted, to look like a trolley. It could be green. It could be anything. We could have our local talented artists come up with some great designs. So that's my message today, and I will keep working on this. I think it's extremely important. And I'll also say that I am the primary caretaker for my 94-year-old mother, who is extremely social and loves to be involved in everything. I experienced the same difficulties that Ms. Capone made about trying to engage in Fiesta. So anyway, I'll stop there. I thank you all, and I'm available for any questions or, willing to help in any way I can. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Do you have a card you can leave us with your name and contact info?
I'll see if I have one, and I did write all my information down on the, and others here do have my contact information, so, yeah, happy to.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
First, love the Merry Pranksters reference and the paint job. Does this, van, this trolley accommodate wheelchairs? And, it looks like the kind of ramp I'm familiar with. And if so, how many, and is this actually in operation somewhere? This exists?
Yes, I've been to,
And so how many, how does it work once somebody's on a wheelchair? Do they then go back, in the trolley? I'm just wondering how it accommodate, how many people does it accommodate, and, how does it really work?
well, I'm not I'm not an expert in these particular, but I know I have had the experience with my mother, and I know that in many of the airports, if you stay at a hotel, they have these shuttles that take you to the airport and back. They all have these. And the bus comes up, it's called a kneeling bus, and it comes up to the curb, and then it has a hydraulic where it lowers down a little bit, and then this ramp that you see shoots out, and then you just simply roll on, or if you're in a walker, whatever, it's easy to just get up. You don't have to go up a step.
Right.
And then usually the front portion of the vehicle is open. There's no seats there, or else they have like fold-down seats, that if there's no one in a wheelchair, then they can fold down the seat and anyone could sit there. But it's just an open area, so you don't, and it's usually in the front part, closest to the door.
Okay.
So-
I just know in terms of, strapping them in and, securing them from a wheelchair from moving while the larger vehicle is transporting. I'm just, curious,
Yeah, no,
but great idea, by the way. I think
Oh, thank you.
absolutely a wonderful idea, and it would help so many people. I'm just curious how it works.
I could share a little insight too, if the board is
Thank
interested.
you.
MTD has a number of kneeling ramped buses. I think one of the points Cass is making, and I agree with, is that we need to be advocating for kneeling ramped rather than hydraulic lift access, because those hydraulic lifts are really prone to failure. More moving parts, more maintenance issues, puts a person in a wheelchair up off the ground at higher risk for injury. There's a number of problems with a higher floor vehicle and a hydraulic lift as opposed to a kneeling vehicle with ramps. In the city, I think every city bus is kneeling and ramped. And there are a number of little city buses MTD has in its inventory that used to be run across the waterfront that were very accessible. They look like trolleys, and you can see them still in use today on the number 3 line that services Cottage Hospital, Sansom Clinic, and the San Marcan area. There's a loop, and I had occasion to ride it recently. Very convenient. The bus driver folded up a seat, strapped my chair in, and it works very well. And so the vehicles exist today, and if we did something like this, I imagine, MTD would be who we would have to contract with to do it. And so I don't know. I suspect the problem is funding, and we need to find a way. I don't know why Rob Dayton decided we needed to do away with the waterfront shuttle, but there's another problem with that, and that is this city council is increasingly moving us away from dependence on personal automobiles and towards dependence on public transportation. They're removing the parking requirements downtown in favor of denser housing, and in doing so, when they gave up the waterfront shuttle, they disconnected our public train system from our public bus system. So if you want residents and visitors to be able to get around Santa Barbara without a car, we need to reconnect those lines, in my opinion.
Chair, excuse me, may I say one other comment in response?
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is that okay? I just want to underscore that I believe that the provision for this access can be either given in the form of returning the private automobile to State Street. That would be one way you could do that. Or you get this kneeling trolley immediately. But I believe that this should have happened, when COVID first hit. This is an extremely important aspect since we changed the nature of the street. So I don't think this is something that's a master plan idea. I think it's something that needs to be put in place immediately. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jim, Skylar's got his hand raised.
Okay.
Yeah. Let's see, is this on? Good. Yeah, I think the trolley is needed regardless of what happens with the car routes on State Street, because, of course, not everyone has access to a car or a driver. So for that accessibility, it's important to fight for that shuttle regardless. So I guess I probably should have a better understanding of this already, but it sounds like it would be a decision of the MTD to support this, but the city council would have to grant funding to it. Is that correct?
Yes.
My guess is MTD would have no problem facilitating the need if there was funding. and support. But, you know, since we have the great honor of having Assistant City Attorney Dan Hedgke here, I wonder if he would indulge me in commenting on the city's obligation under Title II.
Perhaps you'd put that into your talk when you're scheduled? Thanks. I'm going to point out real quickly, Vice Chair Burnham and I both met with Hillary Blackaby from MTD, and there are a bunch of shuttles in the inventory that aren't being used. They would like to use them, but it was a problem with the abrupt cancellation of their contract with MTD. And people like me have no way to get down to the waterfront.
Or the train?
Or the, well, yes, or any place. I used to go shopping and then come back with my heavy bags on the shuttle. Now I can't do that. So this is something that, as Cass pointed out, you can't just close down a street and expect everybody to still have access. So we should finish that comments now, but I thank you both for those great public comments. Okay. The next item is the approval of the minutes. Does anyone have any changes to the minutes that were posted on the website? If not, Raymond, can you call up a roll call to approve the minutes?
Suzanne Tejada,
Yes.
Michael Rasler,
Yes.
Karen Luckett,
Yes.
Nick Kuntz,
Yes.
Skylar Kovich,
Yes.
Chair James Marston.
Yes? Okay. It's been approved, and the minutes from May 19th are accepted. Next, we have the ADA Coordinator's Report. I know Brian has some interesting things to let us know about.
Yes, thank you, Chair Marsden. I have a few items. I'm going to try to be brief here so we can stay on track with our schedule because we have a few important items I want to make sure we have the time to dig into later. But a couple of things. One, the public right-of-way accessibility guidelines known as PROAG. That's been a draft rule that has been out there for probably more than 10 years. And I think most public works agencies liked the guideline. In general, engineers, public works officials, we like standards and guidelines, and this was probably one of the better ones out there. So we've followed it in a lot of ways, but there hasn't ever been an enforceable standard associated with that, and I think we're getting close because on August 8th, the final rule was published, which was a lot of years in the making. That will be effective September 7th, but there's still another step that needs to take place, which will be a responsible agency adopting those standards, which would, I think it'll be the DOT, federal DOT. So we're still waiting for those final steps to take place, but that's a really big deal, long time in the making, the public rights of way accessibility guidelines.
Can I ask a follow-up question on that?
Sure.
It has been the position of this city and other municipalities that this is a draft where we can't commit to following a draft, even, you know, as good as the guidelines are, we're not going to go that route because it could change. Now that it's no longer a draft, and even though it's not adopted, is the city's position unchanged on adherence to those guidelines?
Committee member Kuntz, I don't know that we've taken another stance. I think we do need to look into it, as all agencies in the whole state of California do. Hopefully, there'll be some clarity provided, maybe by another agency, but we'll need to figure that out sooner than later, exactly what is enforceable and when, and that may come down to a point in time when a responsible agency, DOT, as I mentioned, adopts this, which I think is likely to happen this fall. At one point, I thought I saw a date associated with that, but I don't know if that was official or not. So we're keeping an eye on that, and we very likely will need to take a different stance as this moves forward. Anything else on that? I have a few other items.
Go ahead.
Okay. CASP training, so myself and a number of folks both in community development and public works attended 2 different sessions of CASP training, which was led by John Caparelli last month and then earlier this month, focused on Chapter 11B, Parts 1 and 2. I think in total it was more than a day's worth of content, and I think it was probably more like a week's worth of content that he crammed into those 2 sessions. So it's focused on public buildings, public accommodations, commercial facilities, and public housing, and it just reinforced how much information there is to know about the standards and just all of the little details associated with that. And John, the trainer, he was just a wealth of information. I have now additional information, resources available to help as things come up. And similar on that track, I've mentioned to the committee before about I'm trying to get a training set up for our department ADA liaisons, and I think John Caparelli potentially would be a good trainer for that. I don't know that he necessarily needs to be the one, but I've been planning to have a training with those liaisons. It'll probably be sometime this fall. I just haven't gotten to the point of scheduling it and figuring out exactly what the content would be. We've got a lot of departments who do a lot of different things, so trying to make it relevant to each of those liaisons. So working on that. I don't know if any members of the committee are aware of trainers who might be good for that purpose, but definitely trying to get that scheduled in the next probably 2 or 3 months. And last thing, just a quick update on the ADA transition plan. So at the recommendation of AAC, we did hire a consultant brought on board to go revisit the priority locations from the prior ADA transition plan update. And they've been out last week and this week. They've begun to do some assessments of those facilities. And I should have a preliminary report from them next month. At one point, we were hoping to bring them into this meeting here today, but with some of the other items that ended up on the agenda that seemed had some urgency to it, we decided we'll have them come to the next meeting, and in advance of that meeting, we'll share a draft of what they've come up with, give you guys hopefully enough time to take a look at it before the meeting and discuss it at that time. And ultimately, what we want to do with the work that they've put together is come up with a game plan of items to work on with the funds that have been budgeted for that purpose, for dealing with ADA transition plan items. So that's the update on that, and I think that's everything I had under ADA coordinator report. Did I miss anything, Jim?
I think those are the 3 things you had on the agenda.
We may want to ask if there were any comments from people watching online.
That was my thought too. We didn't ask for online public comment.
Sarita, if you're there, is that something you can help us with? If there's,
No, there are no online public comments.
okay, thank you. Thanks, Karen.
Actually, we just got one. Let's see. Barbara Silver, I'm allowing you to talk. If you could unmute.
Okay, I finally saw where I needed to unmute, but I can't see on the screen. Okay. Am I unmuted?
We hear you.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Well, Brian, thank you very much for the updates. And with the transition plan, there's no reason why they can't be using Measure C money as well for the infrastructure improvements.
Is that your comment?
That's my comment,
Okay.
because Brian said with the money that had been budgeted for the transition plan, which is kind of vague considering all the years that it's been in abeyance. But Measure C money which is about $25 million a year now, is designated for infrastructure improvements.
Yes.
No limitation.
Thank you, Barbara. I appreciate your comment, and I'm reminded that Ms. Shue came before this board and advocated for the support of passing Measure C by pointing out that it would make money available for accessibility improvements, and that's why it got my support. So I'd sure like to see those promises delivered.
Thank you,
Well,
Barbara.
One other thing, I'm your de facto liaison to the Downtown Parking Committee, and I'm also now your de facto liaison to the Measure C Oversight Committee. So I will keep this alive. Excuse me, keep this alive as best I can.
Thank you, Barbara. We miss you here.
Thank you.
All right, the next item agenda is ad hoc committee reports.
Is there no more public comment online?
Correct, there are no more public comments online.
Nick has a
Unfortunately,
report on sidewalk.
Jim, can you pass one of those back this way? Unfortunately, I gave you all of them.
Well,
Thank you.
I got one. Jim, I got it.
okay.
Well, now you need one.
Do you have yours? I got it.
Do you have one of these? I can share with him.
We need one more here. Jim, one more.
For Brian?
No, for me. Oh. You sent one down, Tim.
I gave one to him.
Okay. You want one?
So we have a number of ad hoc committees, and as I am on a number of them, I'm seeing I don't have anything to report on the annual report, but maybe Brian can comment on how that's coming along.
Yeah, I'll just mention the date got pushed just yesterday. It was going to be, I think, October 3rd, and now we're looking at October 17th. There was just some agenda management taking place at the city administrator's office, not wanting to have a day where there were too many admin items on the calendar. So we're looking at October 17th, and haven't really begun to put the work together into that one yet. So we've got a little bit of time, and I'd be happy to engage the ad hoc, either just by emails or virtually, to discuss plans for that.
The ad hoc is here to help whenever you need us. The sidewalk ad hoc committee, which is Chair Marston, Bob Burnham, and myself, we met with Brian and Derek Bailey, and the takeaways from that was we finalized an accessible pedestrian signal installation location list. Bob's going to consult with others, but the current candidate locations, I guess I misspoke, we did not finalize. We were moving to finalize. The candidate locations are Garden Street and Carrillo, and State at Ontario.
Was State and where? Ontario. Okay,
State
sorry.
and Ontario, yeah. We discussed the FlexiPave option for filling in tree wells, and Derek agreed, I believe it was Derek, maybe it was Brian, somebody agreed to investigate drilling holes in the FlexiPave to increase permeability. We talked a lot about blue zones, and specifically there's one at 3010 State Street, which has an awkward driveway apron where there's no longer a driveway, and so there's talk of extending the blue zone. 1532 State Street, there's some mailboxes in the parkway adjacent to the blue zone, which create a barrier to accessibility. At East De La Guerra Street, beside City Hall, right there at the corner of De La Guerra and De La Guerra Street and De La Guerra Plaza, underneath, or right at the corner of the City Hall building, that first spot on the corner where there's a ramp is being considered for a new blue zone. But Derek Bailey pointed out that the overhang and the archway does provide some challenges there. It's not able to be completely compliant, but the committee agreed that it would be an improvement regardless of its lack of full compliance. At 00 West Figueroa Street, Derek's going to consult with downtown parking on the availability of another blue zone there, as well as at 35 West Haley Street. Both need a little bit more analysis. And then there's an effort underway to repave Kylarella Street in my neighborhood, and that's going to trigger some curb ramps. But there was there's a part, one block of Kylarellas at the far east end where there is no sidewalk, and because there was no sidewalk, they weren't considering putting in a curb. But there's very few barriers to putting in a sidewalk there. So I asked them to look into that as well to finish that last block, and they agreed to do so. That's all I have on the Sidewalk Ad Hoc Committee report, and none of the other ad hoc committees have met to report on
Can I add
that I know of. Sorry.
something to the blue curb discussion?
Absolutely.
I put in a request to downtown parking to add a blue curb on Gutierrez between Santa Barbara and Anacapa. And they did put one in. A residential blue curb was removed. And then the commercial facilities on that street, it was very difficult parking, especially, for disabled access. And so the city did put in a blue curb on the corner of Gutierrez and Santa Barbara Street, and it's being used. I can see that.
Great.
So I want to thank the city for that.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Absolutely.
With regard to the recognition nomination ad hoc committee and the action we took at our last meeting, which was, approved when we approved the minutes, what happens? And that might be a question for staff. Where do those recommendations recognizing the three different achievements, where does that go and what happens?
Committee member Rossler, I've been in touch with the nomination ad hoc committee about how we want to do that. I think at the annual report is when it makes sense to do so. So I've gotten some feedback from those committee members who are on that ad hoc, and I'll probably reach back out to them as we get closer to the October meeting, and also I think we'll want to be in touch with the recipients so that they're aware. I don't know that it's going to be this super formal process where we have something like that proclamation produced, but it would be a public acknowledgement of the work that was recognized by the committee, and members of the committee would be invited to show up to show their support, and hopefully the community members being recognized would also be interested in attending that meeting.
Very good, thank you, appreciate
Yep.
it.
All right, we have three great presentations coming up. I
Jim,
wanna-
real quick, does anyone on the outdoor dining ad hoc have anything new to report?
No.
Okay.
Okay, before we get to our next three presentations, I want to make sure that we let the presenters talk without interruptions, and then the group can ask questions. After the members have asked questions, then we open it up for public comment about that particular item. When the public comments, both in person and online, are done, then we can have comments and suggestions from the members. So a three-step thing: questions to the presenter, public comment, and then comments from the members. Hello? Yes?
Excuse me, will there be public comment to this item number 6 that you just finished?
Every agenda item has public
Sure.
comment opportunity.
Can I
Yes.
make public comment on that?
Okay.
Thank you. I'm Cassandra Ensberg again. I just wanted to ask, on these subcommittees that you have, these subcommittees, do you also address drop-off? You were talking about curb drop-off and those types of things. Do you address the issues relative to our museums and theaters on State Street, and the issues we're having right now for drop-off of patrons to those places? I'm specifically thinking of the Granada, but I'm sure the others also may have those same concerns. Thank you.
Brian, did you have a comment? You reached for your mic.
Yeah, I mean, I can just say that that hasn't been a topic of conversation in any of these ad hocs up to this point.
But I would point out that there is an ad hoc for the valet parking, which seems like there would be some overlap in this discussion. And while there is not a ad hoc committee formed today to deal specifically with loading zones, it certainly seems to me that that would be a topic of interest to this committee, and is likely going to be of increased focus as we progress through the State Street redesign efforts.
Okay, now we're going to have a presentation from the Special Events Permitting Group from Parks and Rec. I'm not sure who's there, but please come up and give your presentation about it.
And Chair Marston, if I can just introduce that item, if you don't mind, that would
Okay.
be great. So staff has received a lot of commentary from members of the AAC and from members of the public about special events this year. I don't know if this year was different than previous years, or it's just the fact that I'm now back in this ADA coordinator role. But, starting with the film festival, and we had heard from committee member Burnham on that, and then both Solstice and Fiesta. And so being responsive to that, it felt like it was an opportune time to bring the team from Parks and Rec who deals with special event permitting to the committee, where you could learn about the process that they go through. And it is, even though there's 3 people here, it really is a team of one with their support throughout the department, but the lion's share of the effort is with Sarah Knowles. But today what I'm hoping for is that we all can learn a little bit more about the process, and then staff is interested in hearing feedback from the committee, from members of the public, that we can consider, and probably not going to solve, if there are identified issues, we're not going to solve them here today, but we want to hear where there might be some opportunities, and we're willing to come back to another committee meeting, or if it would be better through an ad hoc. We're willing to try to work, as a follow-up step on whatever. It really is going to depend where the conversation goes. But I'm hoping it can be constructive, really forward-looking at opportunities and not so much trying to point out, and I'm not saying we need to ignore the things that went wrong, but let's keep it positive and try to make improvements. And with that, I will turn it over to Sarah Knowles, City's Special Event Coordinator. And thank you, Sarah, for all the work that you do in this area.
My pleasure. Thank you. Good morning, Chair and committee members. My name is Sarah Knowles. I'm the Senior Recreation Supervisor for Parks and Recreation. Today, I will be giving you a brief overview of the special event process, including requirements for accessibility. Next slide, please. Okay, back in 2021, we did adopt a special event municipal code. Prior to 2021, special events permits were either issued by the Parks and Recreation Department or the Police Department, depending on the location. So one of the results of this ordinance, in addition to streamlining the process and establishing standard requirements across the board, was trying to make the process a little bit more efficient and establish that all special event permits would be issued by the Parks and Recreation Department. We permit an average of about 178 special events annually, and that includes events held in parks, beaches, and the public right-of-way. Events include commercial events, events hosted by nonprofit organizations, city-sponsored events, and First Amendment events. Next slide, please. So what is a special event? So events that are advertised and open to the general public. That's the most broad description of a special event. Special events also use city property, public parks, beaches, streets, pathways, sidewalks. Special events can include road closures or any kind of event that requires some type of traffic control. Special events generally would need security or law enforcement, some sort of public resource to help protect public safety. And special events are also defined as any event generally crossing over 75 attendees. We can have special events with less than 75 attendees, but generally we put a threshold there. Next slide, please. So this flow chart just shows you the basic overview of the permitting process. So the first step when someone reaches out and they want to host an event in the city is that we ask them to submit an online inquiry form. With that form, I gather the basic information on the proposed event, including the date, preferred locations, and the basic overview of the event elements that may be at the event, which helps me determine what, if any, additional requirements would apply. So once we review that, and I check with other city colleagues, particularly if it involves the right-of-way, I would be going with traffic engineering or the police department, fire department. Once we can get a tentative approval and we can confirm availability of location and date with the organizer, and at that point, they are asked to submit an official application. One of the reasons we wait is because there is a mandatory non-refundable application fee. So I definitely don't want somebody remitting that fee before we can give them a definite tentative approval. Once we receive the application, I review it. I prepare the tentative permit paperwork, including all the terms and conditions, and then I also provide everyone with a requirement checklist. Just to assist them. So not only are they given information on what other city permits would be required, but also county permits, state permits, and in some cases, federal permits as well. At that point, they have a due date to remit payment and provide all of these additional requirements and proof of that they've met these requirements to me. Once that has been done, then I can officially approve the special event permit. Next slide, please. So special event accessibility requirements. Ultimately, all of the requirements for a special event fall on that of the organizer or the hosting organization. To assist organizers navigate this process and understand what these requirements entail and, what triggers specific requirements, we've developed a special event planning guide. This planning guide was developed with input citywide, across the city, all departments, trying to streamline and identify what permits could possibly be triggered from special event elements. We hope that, and we encourage all organizers to thoroughly read this planning guide. It is extensive, but it is necessary when you are hosting a large event that is open to the public. Part of this, again, the requirements are that compliance with all city, county, state, and federal disability access requirements. Access requirements typically include parking, ensuring that we have enough accessible parking spaces and an accessible path of travel from the parking spaces to the main event area. ADA restrooms. So depending on the location, we may or may not have permanent restroom buildings on site that of course have the ADA restrooms, but people are also required to bring in additional portable restrooms. We ensure that the path of travel is accessible. Depending on the event, we may require a certain width of sidewalk or to ensure that, things stay absolutely unobstructed on pathways and sidewalks and entrances in and out of the event space. Also signage. So we have required events in the past, especially when there could be a large crowd, to post signage with arrows directing the public to the accessible pathways and restrooms. Next slide, please. So next steps. As Brian Damore said, we're here to receive feedback from your committee. We were hoping that the committee develops a set of recommendations and considerations that we could fold in to our requirement process or education for event organizers, and then potentially updating the special event guidelines and planning guide. The guide that was sent to Mr. Damore earlier that was shared with us for temporary events for ADA access is incredibly helpful and thorough. And at this point, I've already see the value of that and sharing that with all of our event organizers as a resource, including the link, maybe adding that to the special event planning guide so it's part of our actual paperwork and documentation and the information that we provide organizers as they develop their event. So we've also included a hyperlink to the special event planning guide, which is available on our city website. And the link is sent to every organizer, despite whether or not it's a first-time event or if it's something that's been hosted year after year for the last decade. Other than, sorry, next slide. Oh, that's it. Thank you very much. And now I guess it's, I'm ready to answer any questions you may have.
Well, I have a real quick one. Did you say you're going to include the ADA guidelines that we sent to you in your guidelines? Or is that in there already?
Yes, Chair, it's not there already, but I do have plans to update the special event planning guide. We do have a section in that guide regarding accessibility requirements. So it's a very simple process for me to update that and include a hyperlink to that wonderful guide so that people have access to that.
Okay, thank you.
I have a couple questions, if I can proceed. Now, this is the guideline we were given today, and that's given out to each special event person?
Yes, Committee Member Lockett.
Okay. And so in this section, page 17, accessibility requirements, that's what they're notified of formally on how to make an event accessible, correct?
Yes, initially. In addition to that, I also add language to the terms and conditions of the special event permit and the requirement checklist, specifically regarding the number of ADA accessible portable restrooms that are required for each event and keeping pathways of travel open and clear. And again, for large events that use the public right-of-way, for instance, something related to a parade or running event where the sidewalks may become congested, I will work with my colleagues in Public Works to determine 4 feet width must be or more. For large events, we in the past have required more than a 4-foot width on public pathways.
Okay, but that checklist isn't included in this handout.
No, I send that separately along with their
Okay.
special event permit to
Okay.
each organizer.
And is it possible we get to see that checklist? Can you send us that checklist so that, or even access it now online, so we can see, first of all, what is required? And secondly, after you give them the checklist and they say, yes, we're going to do this and this, what kind of follow-up to make sure they actually rented a handicap bathroom or enough bathrooms and they put it in an accessible place? Is there a follow-up process to make sure they've done things right?
Yes, committee member, we do require them to provide me with the invoice and order for the portable restrooms so that I verify that they have ordered enough accessible restrooms. They also supply me with a site map showing where everything is placed, so I can check that in advance to make sure that that meets our requirements. Now, on the day of the event, we do have a staff member who is there during setup time to just watch everything that's being set up to ensure that it is being placed appropriately as per the approved site map, and that we do have enough toilets there per the order that was provided. In regards to the requirement checklist, that is customized for every single event and sent to them directly by email. So I can provide, after this meeting, the general language that I use for each event or some examples for specific events where I have provided this.
Okay, okay. On the special event planning guide, what I see, if I were to apply, says I am required to comply with all city, county, state, and federal disability access requirements. The common person who's not a AAC member or a occupational therapist is not going to go and look at all those guidelines. They don't even know where to find them. So how is this better defined to an event planner?
So during the planning process and the permitting process, where I have a very close interaction with these organizers, through direct email and phone conversations is generally where we flush that out, because it does vary from event to event, depending on the complexity, number of people attending, and the location. But again, this wonderful guide that was sent to us, I think that that would be very beneficial to add to that planning guide so that there is a resource that people can read as they start the planning process where they're even thinking of hosting an event.
Okay, can I go on a little more, if you mind? So I took it on myself to ask both Solstice and Fiesta parade organizers for accommodations for the disabled. From the Solstice people, I was told, we have VIP seating for seniors. They can buy tickets. I said, well, they don't need to buy a ticket to sit because they have a wheelchair. They have their own chair.
Karen, excuse me, but this is questions only. Maybe that would be part of your comment? Or is this really a question?
Okay, I'm getting to it.
Okay.
And they said I should contact the city, and so there was a lot of back and forth. It seems like the Solstice people weren't enlightened to the need to accommodate, and they only said they have to buy special tickets. I wonder if this is the way it should be done, or if parade organizers should designate space and parking and bathrooms for handicap, because you're saying it should, and they're saying we don't need to. So I'm just trying to get where the lack of communication gets broken down, and the Solstice not being aware or open to providing for the disabled.
Well, I know that this topic came up, and Mr. Demore did supply an answer to that to help clarify some of the questions revolving that seating. I would maybe defer to Brian to clarify on that a little bit more.
Sure. And first of all, I'll share that parades are they're a unique special event, so trying to fit the code into a parade can be a bit tricky. And I understand the effort that you're trying to take to provide greater accommodations, greater accessibility. The only requirement is, if you have seating, which would be like at the county bowl, at the stadium, if there's seating for an event, there needs to be an accommodation for accessible seating. These parades, some of them do provide seating for paid customers. So if somebody who had a need for special accommodation wanted to be in that VIP seating, they would need to contact the event organizer. And what they were told is that they would have to pay just like everyone else, which is the same as if you wanted to attend a concert at the county bowl. You don't get to attend that for free, but there is an accommodation, there is a space that is available, and it's not off to the side. That's one of the things that the code is very specific about, is that you shouldn't create a set-aside space for disabled. So it's a little bit tricky with the parades, trying to figure out how to balance that. And I think the other piece is the general public who aren't paid. It's kind of scattered. It's a lot of people packed into a really small area, which I think prevents more than just the disabled from attending some of those events. I don't like to go to parades because I don't like to be that close to that many people. But does that mean that a set-aside space needs to be created by the event organizer to accommodate? Legally, no. Ideally, if they wanted to do that, that would be great. But I think what you experienced with Solstice, I don't know, I think you took the bull by the horns more so with Fiesta.
Actually, both.
With both? They've got a lot going on leading up to these events, and maybe it's an opportunity to, now that we're many months out from future events, working with the team in special events to try to talk to the event organizers and see what they might be willing to accommodate, not when it's 3 days before the event. But as far as the legal requirement, they only need to provide equivalent access that they're providing for the general public, which would be this VIP paid seating. I don't know exactly what that looks like. I don't know that anybody who needs special accommodation has attempted to pay and be provided the special accommodations that they need. But yeah, I think that's the summary.
Okay, so I heard you say nobody's legally required to provide accommodations to the disabled at a parade. Did I hear that correct? Did people hear that correct?
I don't know that that's exactly how I worded it.
Okay, so maybe as a community outreach, we could though, right? We could require it, because it sounds like a lot of events do require access for the disabled.
Well, I think the crux here was paid seating and whether or not a fee would still apply to someone who had accessibility needs or was coming in a wheelchair specifically. So that I think is a separate topic that, Mr. Demore assisted with to clarify. But in general, ADA accessibility does need to be maintained for events in general regarding public pathways of travel, restrooms, and some other things covered previously. With the parade specifically, it is a challenge because...
Right, so it's not bathrooms, it's viewing that I guess I'm I'm trying to find a way to require accommodations for viewing without having to pay for a VIP seat. That's what, I guess I'm trying to figure out if that's something we do or we need to work on doing.
If I may, I think a lot of this is relatively new. With the emergence of disability rights and accessibility is, I believe, a little bit different than accommodation. And, in broad stroke, with the special event planning guidelines, I really commend you, Sarah, and your team. It is rather robust and complete. I will say that is smooth and easy as you made it sound in your presentation, and you did a great job. I know that it is an incredibly cumbersome process. It is an incredibly difficult process to manage. I've been involved with a number of both organizations and events at the incredible facilities we have in this community. And thank goodness I have staff that have been able to wade through and work with you directly or your staff to manage these events. But it is a tough process working through these 27 pages of the guidelines. So I'm thrilled that you're revisiting that, and hopefully the entire process can be made easier, especially for the organizations, that are helping to create wonderful events and opportunities for our entire community. But that's different, and the accessibility is wonderful. But accommodation, I think, is another issue altogether that is really relatively new. And I thank Karen in particular for really raising it and going to fight for it, because that accommodation, a special place, a location, shaded area, bathrooms,
parking.
all of that. Well, without all of that, it prevents the entire community from participating in the wonderful things that we have here. And I just think it's so new, that it needs to be on the agenda. We're the Access Advisory Committee for the city. We should be helping every different department, division, element of city operation to understand that this should not be an afterthought. It should not be something that has to be brought by a community member or one of us, but it should be core. It should be part of the SOP, the standard operating procedure, for every department, for any and every event that they help put on or put together, or a building that they construct, whatever. Need to be sensitive to disability rights. You need to be sensitive to disability issues. You need to be sensitive to accessibility as well as accommodation. And I think that's something that's just emerging, and it's great to see, and it's good to know that our city, our community, is actively pursuing how best to do that. So thank you, and I appreciate the direction you're going in.
Well, thank you, Chair and committee members. If I can share a little bit more information regarding Committee Member Luckett's comments. So we, for Solstice, I think one of our big challenges was just timing, based on when the request came in and the limited amount of time we had until the event started. But with Fiesta, things were raised well in advance, and we did work with those organizers to provide dedicated parking and dedicated seating specifically for people who would need some accommodations. And they were very helpful. We worked with Waterfront Parking to get parking spaces right next to where the seating would be. I worked directly with the Old Spanish Days committee member to provide specific dedicated seating along the parade route. So it is definitely something, that organizations are always open to and want to accommodate. But, some of the challenges, again, are timing and just, coordination when you have a large nonprofit group with several people involved in the process. But it's definitely something that we've learned from these two parades. And thank you again for assisting with that and identifying these concerns. And as I said, overall, event organizers want to assist and want to make sure that they are providing accessibility in the way that will work best for the community.
Thank you for those additional comments, Sarah. Is there anyone else who has questions for this
I
presentation?
wanted to show the thank you from the Hillside
Okay,
House online.
this is for questions only,
Okay.
and then we'll have comments later.
Okay.
Okay.
So I just want to, before I get into my questions, I want to thank Ms. Luckett again. And I think that the direction this is heading will lead to a more in-depth, interactive discussion that will resolve your concerns that I share about, and it's more than just accessibility, it's about inclusion, right? The seating may not be required, but it is really helpful to make the physically challenged members of our community feel included. And sounds like there's an opportunity to resolve some of these issues, but I don't think we're going to get there today. So my questions for Ms. Knowles, and I want to thank you for all that you do. I know that you have other responsibilities within the Parks Department, and this is just one of the many hats you wear, and I appreciate it very much. We mentioned the, you mentioned the requirement checklist, and I had the same question as Ms. Luckett. Can you share that with our committee? I understand that it's kind of an organic thing, and but I'm imagining that you have kind of a boilerplate that you narrow down. And so what I'm really interested in is the items from that boilerplate that pertain to accessibility. You may not send them to every event planner, but you have a list of things that you might ask everyone to confirm as it relates to accessibility. I'd like to see that and see if we can help improve that. I'm glad to hear, I was going to ask about, as an interim step, including the ADATA.org planning guide in yours, and I'm glad to hear that's already being considered. I feel like I had one more question. If we don't already, can we consider requiring or recommending that event organizers appoint an accessibility coordinator and publish a point of contact for related concerns?
Committee member, I think that would be valuable. I would have to discuss that internally to see what, if it can be required versus strongly suggested, and I would work with an organization directly to identify someone in their organization. A lot of the events that we do, especially if they're not a large-scale event, you know, there's really one person as the main point of contact.
Right.
So I'm sure that they could suffice in that role.
Right.
For these large-scale events, as we've been discussing, they have several committee members. Without confirming with anyone, I can assume that that is something that everybody would be able to accommodate.
I would think so. And, you know, I notice, you know, in your presentation, you refer to the municipal code. And I also notice in the municipal, and maybe I should save these for the comments section. I think I will.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the members? Okay, now I'll open it for public comments about this presentation. Yes, Nancy?
Come up to the mic, please.
Hello, it's Nancy Capone again. And in response to the presentation about the special event planning, I just want to express my disappointment to find at the E Modenari Festival again this year, the blue parking space is completely blocked off. I made a big presentation a year ago to this committee about that, and nothing has changed. It even seemed to be worse. And is it legal for them to block off the blue parking, or is it because it's private property? I don't know why, you know, this is happening. That's just one example. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Cass?
I'd like to answer Ms. Capone, and it's my belief that that's not legal, and that if they are going to block off their ADA parking even temporarily, they are required by federal and state law to provide an alternate parking location for that temporary change. And if we don't have staff resources to confirm that that happens or that it's on the checklist, it's going to be missed every time.
Chair and committee members, I can comment on that. That is an event held completely on private property, and the city is not involved in permitting with that event. Thank you.
So what recourse would I have if I wanted to pursue it? The city has no involvement, that's what I was wondering.
Well, I don't, we,
The event organizers themselves.
yes, or the property, I mean, there, I would defer to, Mr. Demore if regarding this, the requirements for ADA access for parking spaces on private property.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, recognize, I guess.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, isn't it the case that events of a certain size do fall under city regulations? Like there have to be permits for larger events like that?
A committee member only on city property.
But like, aren't there regulations at all about events on private property once they get to a certain size and become, essentially more public?
Not, committee member, not part of our current special event permitting process. My involvement with events occurring on private property is, at a minimum, they are told they still must follow all city municipal codes and like county health requirements for food service, et cetera.
That's kind of what I meant, but
Yes.
that's interesting. So it really falls under a completely different department.
It does. It basically, at that point, the special event and Parks and Recreation Department are not involved unless they reach out and they would like to do some sort of traffic control, or they would contact the police department directly to ask for uniformed officers, which they would be invoiced for and have to fill out a specific form. So in those cases, they generally reach out to departments individually and do not go through the city special event permitting process.
Not to get too far afield here, but Mr. Demore, I feel like we've been down this road before with alterations to private property and parking, and I think that we came to the conclusion that this is a community development enforcement issue. Is that your recollection, or is it?
If it has to do with a building permit or a site plan, then yes, but in this situation, it really isn't. It's an operational thing. This is something that actually came up in the CASP training with John Caparelli, and he actually provided some form letters that he sends as a chief building official when complaints like this come up that are outside of the purview of the local agency's enforcement, but explains the exposure that a private business or entity is putting themselves into by being in violation of the ADA. And I have those form letters now, and I could probably modify something like that as something that we sent, even though, again, the city doesn't have an enforcement mechanism for this. We could at least inform them of their exposure, because anybody who felt like their rights were violated because of whatever a private business is doing, whether it's in a I don't want to call it a special event because it's not a city-sponsored special event, or if it's just a restaurant and they're blocking something, they're at risk of lawsuits, and there's certainly consequences to that. So that's really all we can do in a situation such as this.
So the answer, Ms. Capone, is your only recourse is civil litigation.
Thanks a lot, I'm not so inclined.
I would join in a class action.
Okay, Cass?
Yes, thank you, Cassandra Ensberg again. I just wanted to just make one point out that as we're trying to think about how do we be inclusive of our entire community, And when we're having a special event, and especially if it's a city event, like a parade or something, we should be, I believe, I would suggest that we be very mindful of the location and how do we select a location that's the easiest for everybody to get to. So I just bring this up about parades and State Street specifically. My mother used to live at the Villa Santa Barbara, and it was very easy for us to come, when the parade is on State Street, it's very easy for people to come from either the east or the west and just come right in and join together at the street to enjoy the parade. And that's what we used to do. I used to pick her up, I would wheel her down, we'd go in front of the Granada, and there we were, and never missed a parade. On Cabrillo Boulevard, it's quite the opposite, because you've got the ocean on one side and then the city on the other, and it's not as easy. And so we missed the parade this year, and we probably will miss it again next year. It's just too hard, and part of the reason, as you all know, accessibility is for the individual who needs the help, and it's also for the helper to make it easier for them to be able to navigate and bring this person and to serve them in the way that they need. So I'm just bringing that up as sort of as my architect side, big picture thinking. Where is the best place to put these things that enable the most participation by the entire community? So, thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comments from the audience? And if not, Raymond, do you have anyone on the internet that wants to make a public comment?
Yes, we have one attendee on Zoom who has a request to speak. Their name is Accessible Santa Barbara.
Okay.
Now allowing to talk. Accessible Santa Barbara, if you could speak. Thank you.
Good morning. This is Will Railing for Accessible Santa Barbara, an unincorporated nonprofit association. I just first want to say that this agenda item really illustrates what an amazing committee the Access Advisory Committee has become. Extending the reach of the group to everything the city does, and this is an extremely important topic and an extremely constructive discussion. I think the desire for the city to encourage events by streamlining permitting and regulation is understandable. Unfortunately, streamlining is often in conflict with accessibility. It's extremely difficult to streamline accessibility requirements. And here, I think putting what's clearly needed is some enforcement beyond the issuance of the permit, enforcement during the events. And if that is not a cost the city wants to pass on to the events, then the city needs to do that just as a further subsidy to those events that the city is paying for the enforcement. I want to say a word about the legal landscape in terms of who's responsible, because it does sound like the city is putting essentially all the responsibility on the event. So I'm going to separate accessibility problems in events into two categories. One is the accessibility of the event itself. Second is the accessibility of the city facilities, the city right-of-way, that needs to be maintained during the special event. And I'm going to focus on that latter category, because it's unusual in accessibility to have a binding federal Ninth Circuit court opinion that is directly on point. But when it comes to maintaining city accessibility during special events, there is a case directly on point from the Ninth Circuit. It's Cohen versus the city of Culver City, 754 Federal 3rd 690 from 2014. And I will email this decision to Brian and Mr. Henshey and anyone else that's interested. And the case holds that when a special event blocks some aspect of city accessibility, that can be a Title II, ADA Title II violation of the city. And here it was really a relatively minor blockage, and a disabled elderly gentleman. There was a car show, and there was a display blocking a curb ramp. The disabled person couldn't use the curb ramp, and in their effort to circumvent that, they fell and hurt themselves. And if that is an ADA Title II violation, then really a lot of these other stories that we've heard from people where they're not able to pass through use the normal city facilities during a special event, like maybe a blue curb not being available in the public right of way, is potentially problematic for the city. And one thing, the city attorneys are definitely aware of is it's not just a disabled person suing the city for an ADA Title II violation, but increasingly what the city is seeing is that in their flow of regular slip and fall cases that the city gets hit with, that there's been some instances where the plaintiff's attorney, decided to, juice it up with adding on an accessibility claim, which would then allow them to demand attorney's fees and so forth, separate from the regular slip and fall damages. And that is, in fact, what that Culver City case was. So I think it's in the city's interest to add some enforcement to these special events, and in particular to make sure that the special event is in no way limiting the ability of people with disabilities to use the regular city facilities in the public right of way. And one of the incidents that you have been discussed that occurred with that unfortunately Vice Chair Burnham experienced during the film festival, I think may well have been in that category. So thank you very much for having this item, and I look forward to seeing this process developing in a dialogue in the coming months. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other internet comments?
There is one more request to speak from Barbara Silver.
Go ahead, Barbara.
Barbara, if you could unmute.
I think I have succeeded in unmuting myself. So I was interested to hear that the VIP seating, which it requires payment, is a limiting factor. But how do you decide who can require payment for seating on the public right-of-way? And could those permits actually include a provision for seating for the handicapped at no charge as part of granting the right to charge for the public right-of-way? That's my question.
That would just be up to the event organizer, but they would not.
That's not what I heard Barbara ask. Can the city implement a requirement or a policy whereby if an event organizer chooses to sell seating, can the city require that they provide seating for the disabled?
Chair and committee members, Rich Hanna, Recreation Manager. I'm not in a position to answer that question right now, but we would defer to our legal attorney and be happy to refer back to the committee at the next meeting.
Great. I think I have the answer, but I'll wait for the comment period.
So now it's the time for the members to comment, but we are in a rush for time here, so can we be brief? And I will suggest this. We've been asked to help deal with Parks and Recs on this issue. I think we should have a committee. I would say Karen, Mr. Rassler, and Mr. Kuntz, the three of you could probably deal directly with Parks and Recs because
As an ad hoc?
Whatever you want to call it, it could be an ad hoc or a working group or whatever.
Yes, I was going to suggest that.
Yeah. So
We
maybe
do need an ad hoc to work to, because I know Sarah said they were open to.
Yeah.
I think that would be an action we would take after comment.
Well, I'm just saying it's a possibility to do that, so maybe we
Yep.
can. Okay. We're open for comments from committee members, but remember, we're running out of time.
Okay, I'll be real quick. From having worked with the Fiesta and the Solstice Committee, there were a number of issues that can be made better. And number one was accommodate additional handicap parking spaces temporarily during the actual event. And Brian was very helpful in making that happen and working with Harbor Parking. We got extra places. Also, notifying the police that a handicap van or vehicle has to go through a roadblock so they can access handicap curb parking. Also, when the handicap bathroom was set up, they weren't told specifically where to set it up, so it was set up 2 blocks away from the handicap seating. Thank goodness, last minute, I said this has to be moved, and it did get moved into the right place. So we need a map from the special events people to where the seating's going to be, and where the handicap bathroom's going to be, and where the parking's going to be, because sometimes just telling them doesn't get it right. And also, we can send a map out to people who, in the community, like Hillside and Momentum, where to park and where to sit. Okay, make sure there's handicap bathrooms near seating, a good path of travel to both the seats and bathrooms. Advertise the accessibility to the community. A lot of the disabled are on multiple medications, and they shouldn't be in the sun for any length of time, so canopies at these events would be very helpful. Also, I found a lot of people who weren't disabled sitting because they saw a seat, so there needs to be some monitoring of making sure that a person really who needs to be there is there and not just someone passing by. And maybe signs to direct people to the seating and to the accessible bathroom. And also countertop heights at different venues should be accessible. So eating areas, countertop heights to order food and such. So these are just some ideas I came up with in the
Please bring the list to our ad hoc meeting?
Yes, I have it, and I grabbed a bunch of papers, but not this list. But yes, and I appreciate your time and your openness to working with the committee to making it more accessible and inclusive.
Does anybody else have comment before I do? In the presentation, you shared that special events are permitted in accordance with the Municipal Code 15.17, and in reviewing that code, I found no reference to accessibility requirements, and that's pretty common with these kinds of things. But the code does give the special events coordinator substantial power and duty that could benefit accessibility, and the most pertinent of them are to propose, administer, and enforce administrative guidelines or regulations adopted pursuant to that chapter. So I think that speaks to Ms. Silver's question that Ms. Knowles does have the authority to do it. Ms. Silver is asking if she chooses to. Also, you have the authority to refer an application to city departments and other government agencies for review, recommendations, and approvals, and there might be situations where it would be appropriate to refer something to the building department for code review. And so I think we should be giving some consideration to that. I also thoroughly reviewed the city's special event planning guide, which does very little to address accessibility. It does make it clear that the event planners are responsible for accessibility compliance, but it does not provide much guidance on how to do so. I appreciate that you're willing to include the ADATA.org guide, and I think that'll be very helpful. And And I am very confident that this discussion will lead to improved guidelines and with the help of an ad hoc committee. But what concerns me the most is that the city's current policies and procedures seem to put too much of the responsibility on event planners and do not provide enough oversight or enforcement. So I hope that we can learn from the struggles that we experienced with the outdoor dining program and commit to an enforcement policy change more quickly. Because if we go through the same cycles that we went through with outdoor dining, because the outdoor dining was happening consistently every day, and it took us 3 years. These events aren't happening so consistently. We have a season, it happens every summer. And so it could be decades before if we follow that trajectory that we experienced with outdoor dining.
Okay, Nick, can we just put this in the ad hoc report? Or is this stuff that you think?
Two more sentences.
Okay.
I feel very strongly that the city needs someone on staff with more than a layperson's understanding of accessibility requirements to work closely with the planners to ensure things are not overlooked. I have been advised that city staff lacks available resources to either field verify or enforce violations for an all-day event operations, and I'd like to advocate for a change there.
Thank you. Could we take a 5-minute break? It's 10 after 11, so we're running over. So you want to turn off the mics?
Well, do you want to try to wrap up this item before you take a break? That's what I would recommend.
Yeah, we need a motion to form the ad hoc. Is that what I'm hearing, Brian?
Up to the committee.
Okay.
I moved to form an ad hoc committee to work with the Parks Department staff on improving the guidelines and for special events.
Aye.
Second. Do you wish to include the committee members who would be part of that in the nomination, or I mean in the motion?
Sure. Chair Marston had suggested myself, Mr. Rassler, and Ms. Luckett, and if everyone is agreeable, I think that'd be a great committee.
I agree with that. Good suggestion.
Thank you.
And I think that's the best way to get more stuff done with Ms. Knowles and the Park Department. So thank you all for your presentation.
Are we going to vote? Roll call vote?
So yeah, you motion, Nick, I can second.
Yep.
Okay. Raymond, you want to do a roll call?
Suzanne Tejada,
Yes.
Michael Rassler,
Yes.
Karen Luckett,
Yes.
Nick Kuntz,
Yes.
Skylar Kovich,
Yes.
Chair James Marston.
Yes. Okay, now we'll take a 5-minute break. Thank you all for your patience.
Recording stop.
switch the order. Item 10 will be next. That's the closure of State Street and the outdoor dining ordinance. And then after that, we'll have item 9, which is the downtown parking group. So, Mr. Henshey, we're ready to have your...
Thank you, Honorable Chair, members of the committee. My name is Dan Hinchke, for the record, and I'm the Assistant City Attorney. I'm here to talk to you just very briefly to give you an update on the status of the State Street Promenade Pilot Program, which is what we're calling what is going on right now on State Street. At the June 27th City Council meeting, the City Council gave 2 directions to the City Attorney. One was to draft a ordinance that would extend the current authorization for the pilot program from December 31st of this year until December 31st of 2026, or until the conclusion of the State Street master planning process, whichever is earlier, and also to extend the outdoor dining on State Street program that is currently underway for the same period of time. That ordinance is currently being drafted, and it is scheduled for the City Council meeting on September 19th. What I would like to do today is highlight some of the provisions of the proposed ordinance as I am currently drafting it to bring them to your attention. The first is as directed by council, the ordinance will continue the current State Street closure and the current authorizations to make modifications to the operational aspects of State Street so that we can test different kinds of configurations, different potential traffic patterns, and the like. But State Street from Victoria down to Haley will continue to be primarily what I'm going to say is a pedestrian promenade with other types of wheeled vehicles, including bicycles, skateboards. And one of the things that I'm making sure is included in the ordinance so that everybody is clear is that all types of mobility devices under the vehicle code are pedestrian devices. And so a person in a mobility device is considered to be a pedestrian and is subject to all of the authorizations in the vehicle code related to that.
You said through 2026?
To December 31st, 2026 is what the council direction was. The ordinance combines both aspects of continuation of the outdoor dining program and continuation of the State Street closure. A couple of things that we have specifically included. One is, as you are probably aware, that in order to have an outdoor dining facility on State Street, you have to have an outdoor dining license that's issued by the Public Works Department. One of the requirements that we're putting in the ordinance is that the operator of the outdoor dining facility, the outdoor business facility, because you can do other things other than dine in them, it can be required to submit a CASP certification for that facility as a condition of the issuance of the permit and as a condition of the ongoing use of the permit. And so that is specifically included. The other, I think, important aspect is that we've created a specific role for both the Historic Landmarks Commission and the Access Advisory Committee with respect to, one, any changes to the rules and regulations. Those would need to be referred to the Access Advisory Committee and to the HLC, which would have 60 days to review and comment on the proposed change in the rules and regulations, either for the operation of the outdoor business facilities, before they would be implemented. And then they could be implemented after that 60-day period if no comments were received. The other aspect is that the city council had, at its last meeting on August 22nd, stated its intention to have regular meetings at the city council at which it reviews, directs, and essentially supervises the pilot program for the operation of the promenade, both the traffic configurations and the outdoor business facilities. As part of that meeting, the proposed ordinance currently states that the chair of the Access Advisory Committee and the chair of the HLC will have the opportunity to make presentations to the council as part of the agenda item, in addition to staff reports that would be there. So this would provide a direct access and opportunity for this committee to provide input on a regular basis to council relating to matters within the committee's jurisdiction and the operation of State Street. That's where we currently are. Other than that, the ordinances basically continue the existing pilot program in their current configuration, with recognizing that the purpose is to pilot activities and make and test different operations. So that's what we're doing. That's what the plan is. The ordinance will be released soon. It's not ready for release, but that's where it is. It'll be on the council agenda on September 19th is the current schedule. Be happy to answer any questions.
I have a couple of quick questions. Will this committee have an opportunity to give feedback on that draft before council votes to approve it?
Honorable Chair, members of the committee, I think the answer is yes.
Okay.
I don't know what your meeting schedule is, but certainly once the ordinance is made public, I can make sure that Mr. Damore has a copy that he can distribute to you. And certainly you would have the opportunity as a body or even as individuals to make your comments known at the council meeting.
Great. Other quick question is regard to you mentioned CASP certification. As you and others are likely aware, the Certified Access Compliance Specialist program is not intended to address this kind of need, and I'm a little concerned that what exactly a CASP is going to be certifying in this context.
Honorable Chair, members of the committee, that's a really good question. The CASP certification in the context of this particular ordinance is limited to the outdoor business facility itself. And so as you mentioned, I think during the discussion previously, there were a lot of issues related to the enforcement of ADA and California laws related to accessibility within the outdoor business facilities. And so the goal of the ordinance was to put the obligation squarely back on the responsible person, which is the outdoor business owner, and make them, as part of the application, submit the certification that what they're doing complies before they get their authorization to proceed forward. That was the goal.
Okay. Following up on that, does your draft provide any enforcement provisions if those CASP certifications prove false or are not maintained?
Honorable Chair, members of the committee, the ordinance contains enforcement for violations of the rules and regulations. The rules and regulations require that an outdoor business facility maintain compliance with accessibility laws. So we would enforce directly against the owner. If a licensed CASP submits a false statement, that would be a matter to take up with the regulatory agency of the state that issues the CASP license. I'm not sure that a CASP, we do require that the certification be submitted by a licensed, certified access specialist, a certified CASP. If they violate their certification by filing a false statement, that's a disciplinary matter. That's beyond the control of the city. We have no authority over that.
Understood, thank you.
I have a few questions. As a series of questions. So with the extension of the ordinance to December 31st of 2026, does that mean all of the existing outdoor dining facilities as they are today are going to be continued as is?
Honorable Chair and members of the committee, the council's direction was to continue the existing program as it stands with the opportunity to make alterations to the rules and regulations. So existing facilities would be allowed to remain unless we change the rules and regulations in the future. That's not part of this ordinance. I believe all of the facilities that are remaining in this, in State Street and are all have an issued license permit agreement, which requires compliance with all applicable laws, including ADA.
Well, that was my next question. Will permits be required for these outdoor, as far as I'm aware, permits were not required to be reviewed by a jurisdiction to see if they comply. There were no permits required. And would permits be required now, moving forward?
Honorable Chair and members of the committee, initially, permits were not required. Subsequently, permits were required and are currently now required.
Okay.
All facilities that are within the State Street are required to have the permit now that we've got it in place, and the person who issues the permit is right here.
Okay, okay.
I didn't hear well your answer to the ordinance, the new ordinance, if we will get to see the draft and comment on it before it goes into effect. I don't have my hearing aids in. Could you answer that one?
Honorable Chair, members of the committee, you will have an opportunity to review the ordinance. It is not ready for public distribution yet. Once it is ready for public distribution, I will bring it to make sure that Mr. Demore has a copy of it, and he can bring it to you. I don't know what your meeting schedule is, so I can't answer the question if you as a committee will have the opportunity to review it, because I don't know what your meeting schedule is, but. Yes, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, the next meeting is November 17th, I believe, for general.
Is it possible for us to get a draft of your ordinance ahead of time so we can just deal with you on that?
Honorable Chair, members of the committee, once the ordinance is ready for distribution, we will make it available to the committee.
And that will be a draft.
Right.
Okay.
It'll be in advance of the city, obviously, it'll be in advance of the city council meeting.
Michael, do you have a question?
More of a comment, just envisioning the
Question
future.
first and then comments.
I'll hold my comment, then. I don't think I can form it in a question. Well, maybe I can. Dan, in sending that to us in advance or upon completion of the draft, which is greatly appreciated, is it correct to acknowledge that as the Access Advisory Committee, while we may be invited to provide feedback or input on the draft, we do that in an advisory, I remind the committee members, in an advisory capacity. We are not the decision makers. We can give you input, but ultimately what comes out is the final document, with our input to be used or not as determined by whoever the powers that be are. And it's correct to assume that our input is advisory and not definitive?
Honorable Chair and members of the committee, under your current structure, your advisory to staff, you're correct. The city council ultimately will adopt the ordinance. The ordinance process obviously is a public process, and I am hopeful that you might be able to either provide input to Mr. Demore or even call me individually if there's, as an individual, because you can't act on behalf of the committee, and just say, hey, Dan, you missed something here. It's like, oh, okay. We'll see what I can do.
Well, I'm thrilled the committee members individually as well as collectively are invited to participate. Thank you.
Okay, I have a few questions. I heard no statement about rental fees. We've had a farce here for 3 years. People got free land use for public property. They finally got a lowered fee. Do you have any increase in the fee that would help with enforcement at all in this draft?
Honorable Chair, members of the committee, the draft ordinance as directed by council was to continue the existing program. The existing program has a fee component to it. That fee component is carried into the proposed new ordinance. The amount of the fee is determined by the city council by resolution. That also is continued in the ordinance. And so I can't answer the question about the policy implications of any particular fee amount.
Okay, well, as we know, that fee is much lower than what the parking group called for. Can you at least talk to them and see if they want to increase that fee?
Honorable Chair, members of the committee, certainly I can do so. The amount of the fee is determined by the city council, and they would be the ultimate ones to decide what it would be.
Okay. Now, are you saying that every existing parklet on State Street must have a CAS review to get his permit?
What I'm saying, Honorable Chair, members of the committee, what I'm saying is that in the new ordinance that is currently being drafted, we've inserted a provision that authorizes the Public Works Director, who is responsible for the issuance of the licenses, to require the owner of the facility to provide a CASP certification that the facility complies with accessibility requirements.
So this would have to be done before the end of the year, right, to start the new year? That everybody's going to have to find a CASP? I'm a little confused.
Honorable Chair, members of the committee, the ordinance isn't adopted yet.
All right.
The authorization to require the owner to provide a CASP is there. How that ultimately gets administered, I don't know yet. It's not micromanaged in the ordinance.
I think, if I may, it's they're authorized, the authorized, the person authorizing the license may require, not shall require. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
And Honorable Chair, members of the committee, if I could expound on that a little bit. The purpose of the CASP certification is to help with the enforcement of the requirements. It does not lessen any of the requirements. And the owner is required to maintain the operation of their facility like any public accommodation private owner is required to do, maintain their facility in compliance with all accessibility laws. As you talked about previously, there's an issue of enforcement. We have taken on an enforcement responsibility with regard to outdoor business facilities within the right-of-way as part of our Title II obligation. As part of the Title III obligation and under state law, the business owner is required to comply. The enforcement mechanism for private owners, as Mr. Kuntz so appropriately pointed out, is a civil action by someone who is affected by noncompliance. So that's what we're trying to do with the CASP certification, is to assist the city in the ongoing enforcement of those requirements.
Essentially a new tool.
Is there anything about any kind of transparency in there? We've found out for 3 years there wasn't much enforcement at all until after 3 years. We're worried about enforcement. What kind of power do you have? With the building department, they can put a red tag on and they have to quit working right away. With Public Works involved, it seems like it took 3 years before anyone got shut down. So what can we do about the transparency to the public? And will we be able to make public comments to a certain parklet? Is there a way to see all a list of these permit holders and what kind of complaints have been done and what kind of enforcement can we see? And most of all, what's the timely pattern for this? If you get a person complain about something there, are you going to wait for another 3 years? So that's my concern. Can you?
Honorable Chair, members of the committee, the ordinance establishes effective enforcement tools that are in there. The question that you're asking is really about how do we administer the tools that are there? And that's not something that I can write into an ordinance. That's a enforcement activity that I believe that you need to direct and discuss with Mr. Damore. What I can tell you is that the ordinance continues what we found to be the most effective enforcement tool, which was if a violator gets 2 or more enforcement notices, their ability to maintain the facility at all, to keep it in the street, can be revoked. And we're maintaining that enforcement tool in this ordinance. In addition, we have the traditional enforcement capabilities that we have. I suggest that you discuss ongoing enforcement, because I think the message has been clearly delivered to the community about what their obligations are and what they need to do. Discuss the enforcement with either Mr. Damore or Mr. Bossy, who are responsible for the implementation of the ordinance.
Okay, and does any of this apply to the off-State Street parklets at all? Are they still under a whole different set of rules?
Honorable Chair, members of the committee, this particular ordinance is limited to the State Street Promenade.
Right.
The City Council will be taking up in the near future what to do about parklets outside of the State Street Promenade, and that's a separate discussion, not on this agenda. Those are currently operated under the existing what we call the ERETO, Ordinance 6055. That ordinance expires at the end of the year, and frankly, we are still discussing at the staff level, we'll bring back to council, what to do with outdoor dining facilities, both in the street and on private property citywide, later this fall.
Just to clarify my question then, as far as looking at enforcement and transparency, that should be something with Brian or with Mr. Bossy or whoever issues the outdoor dining agreement, right? Those little minutia on how we can find out what's going on.
Yep.
Honorable Chair, members of the committee, in a word, yes.
Okay.
there's only so much we can do with the ordinances.
Right,
but
I understand.
It's a lot of it's implementation.
One more question. Does the ordinance include an access to the parklet from State Street proper versus the sidewalk?
Honorable Chair, members of the committee, that's an excellent question. The ordinance simply says that the parklet must comply with ADA and California accessibility requirements. What those requirements are and how they apply specifically to a particular parklet is determined on a case-by-case basis with respect to the parklet. And so the ordinance does not address those. We have guidelines that have been adopted. Those guidelines guide the applicants in how they can comply, but the ultimate compliance really depends on an evaluation of each particular parklet.
Okay, because a lot of them don't have access from the street, you know that, right?
Honorable Chair, members of the committee, we are aware of our obligations with regard to Title II within the State Street Promenade, and we believe that we are complying with those. One of the questions often becomes is, what, in any accessibility situation, is accessibility for persons with accessibility issues equivalent to the accessibility that's offered to others? There are parklets on State Street where the only place that anybody can get into it is from the sidewalk itself. So all pedestrians would have to enter the facility from the same public access point. It's our understanding that that is compliant with Title II, and that's what how we are enforcing it.
But we could modify that to say access has to be from the street, right? Is that possible? The reason I'm asking is because when we say equal access, let's say there's a parklet and I'm able-bodied, I can just quickly go up the curb and go in from the sidewalk. If I'm a wheelchair person pushing and have shoulder pain or weakness, I have to go a block and then back a block to access that same thing. So in my mind, as a therapist who's worked with handicapped people, that's not equal access. That's a lot of extra energy and time.
Honorable Chair, members of the committee, I understand the concern and I understand the point. The ordinance does not get that specific in terms of whether accessibility is for a particular parklet is compromised because of the location on the street or sidewalk. It says you have to comply with ADA and California accessibility rules for every parklet along the way, and so we determine that on a case-by-case basis. I would not recommend in any way adopting an ordinance that gets into that kind of detail. That's better left for administrative regulation and case-by-case determination, which is what we've done. The ordinance says you have to comply with ADA and California accessibility. That's the rule, and then how that is done on each particular parklet is determined on a case-by-case basis.
And if the city were to change its position, it would be done in the guidelines, not at the ordinance level.
Honorable Chair, members of the committee, that's how it's been structured, and that's how it's currently structured, and we're continuing that structure. The goal is to have flexibility in the establishment of the guidelines so that we can make changes as necessary. So yeah, the answer, Mr. Coons, is you are absolutely correct. That's how we're doing it.
Thank you, Mr. Henschke. Just one more quick question. If you will indulge me on an opinion as to the city's potentially being at risk for Title II violation without a shuttle on the promenade.
Honorable Chair, members of the committee, that's an interesting question. I would like to have an opportunity to evaluate it and provide a report back to the committee. I wouldn't, I think it might be doing a disservice to simply answer the question today off the top of my head.
Thank you.
Can I ask one more question? I'm a bit confused. You mentioned talking to Brian Bossy, who's with downtown parking, but then you also said outdoor dining license agreement. So that's a different department. Who's going to be in charge of the new system at the beginning of next year?
Honorable Chair, members of the committee, the way the ordinance is drafted is the responsibility for enforcement of these kinds of things is delegated to the Public Works Director. The Public Works Director actually is the department under which all of these folks are. We have the outdoor dining license agreement, which is on the sidewalks. We have the outdoor business facility license agreement, which is within the roadway portion of the promenade. And my understanding is that they're doing within Public Works an integration of the operations. But I recommend that you discuss that with Mr. Bossy or Mr. Demore.
Okay.
It's outside of my area of knowledge.
Thank you. Are there any public comments from those in the audience? Yes?
Thank you again. Yes, now it's on. Thank you again, Cassandra Ensberg. I just not about parklets. I'm not speaking about parklets. Again, I want to speak about equivalent access to a promenade. If this is a promenade, the definition of a promenade is a place to walk and to enjoy the view. Look it up in the dictionary, usually along a lake or a place of beauty. If this is a promenade, then we need to provide the equivalent experience for someone who cannot walk, who cannot ride a bicycle, and who cannot ride a skateboard. They need equivalent experience to be able to simply enjoy the equivalent experience of walking down or up the State Street Promenade. And I believe this is my own opinion from my own experience, that the only way to really provide that is through this public transportation, a trolley like the one that I had brought earlier. So I'm very sad and very frustrated about this because I don't feel that it's fully understood what this means and what it is supposed to provide. So without providing that, we are taking away that access to experience the promenade like everybody else can. So I guess I put that out for Mr. Henschke and the city to consider, and also I will continue to talk about it and urge all of you to speak about it as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else in the audience? Okay, are there any internet Zoom people with a comment?
Yes, we have one attendee, Accessible Santa Barbara. You have 5 minutes to speak.
Hi, this is Will Railing again. Hello. On the CASP certification, I'd like to suggest to Mr. Henschke in his drafting that the city consider hardwiring the language. CASPs, you may well get all sorts of equivocating language in certifications if it's left up to the CASP, what exactly it needs to say. The city could even consult with some CASPs. There's a network of them. I think Brian Demore gets invited to all the cool CASP parties now. In all seriousness, I think that they could, perhaps sort of focus group language that would be acceptable for them to sign all professionals are concerned about liability, of course, when they sign things. I'd like to suggest that in place of saying that the compliance is with ADA and California accessibility rules, that instead of California accessibility, that it should specifically state California Building Code. I mean, California accessibility is the California Building Code, and I'd like to say a few more words about that. Now, there's a lot of misunderstanding about where it applies, and it's largely because there's just a jurisdictional thing between the public right-of-way and private sites, properties. You know, there are assessor parcel number properties that somebody owns, and of course the city owns a great deal of property. Things like De La Guerra Plaza are actually a property. It's not public right-of-way. And the public right-of-way is just the space in between properties, right? Now, in an arbitrary administrative decision, building permits are not required for work in the public right-of-way. However, if you the California Building Code compliance is required anywhere you put a structure. If you consider it, if the city builds a coffee kiosk or a toll booth or a bus shelter, I mean, what standard applies to make that safe? And you know, there isn't any such standard in Caltrans or city standard details. It's the California, you know, what makes your roof structurally safe? It's the California Building Code. So the California Building Code still needs to be complied with, and that's really significant in this in the parklets, because with regard as applied to parklets, the California Building Code is significantly better for accessibility in some instances than federal ADA. So I'd like to see the scope. Somehow it seems odd that last I heard, about half the parklets are in the public right-of-way. I'm sorry, about half the parklets are in the promenade, and about half the parklets are outside of the promenade. So it seems, I guess, ideally that the ones that are outside State Street will be brought under the same rules, and that there will be you know, vigorous enforcement. The city, of course, you know, frankly, I believe no court has held that this is a Title II, that a parklet program is a Title II program. It seems to me that it might be a program. You know, the city is making its public right-of-way available for this use for a specific purpose. But there's no question that the city's duty to enforce the California Building Code under state law definitely applies everywhere. So, okay, well, good luck with the ordinance drafting process, and thank you very much.
Are there any other Zoom comments?
No other comments.
Okay.
Before I lose the opportunity, I want to thank Mr. Henschke for his time and his patience with us today.
Okay, thank you.
It was a pleasure to be here, and I hope to see you all again soon.
Okay, and we got you out of here just in time, right?
You can invite me back anytime.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. And Nick, thank you for your kind words.
Thank you.
Okay, now we're going to look at item number 9, which is the downtown parking operation model and revenue control systems. This is something that we're all very interested in, I think. And I think, is that Ms. Clark coming up?
Yes, it is. And as we wait for her, I just want to check in with the committee because we are at noon. And I don't know if anybody has a hard stop coming up. I think this is, for now, just a presentation. I don't believe that we're looking for an action from the committee, but hopefully we can maintain a quorum and Ms. Clark can work quickly through this item.
The doggy daycare bills are piling up, but it's worth it. I'll hang in there.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair Marston, committee members, for having me here today. My name is Sarah Clark. I'm the city's downtown plaza and parking manager. We wanted to come to you today because this year we're embarking on what's really going to be a 2-year process of reevaluating and either replacing or upgrading what we call the parking access and revenue control system. So in the industry, it's referred to as a parks. And that refers to all of the equipment and the software and everything that goes behind that lets people into and out of the parking lot and that accepts your payment. So it's the gate arms, it's the ticket columns, it's the LPR cameras, it's the cashiering system at exit. That whole system is due for either an upgrade or replacement. And so as part of that process, we are also sort of by necessity taking a look at what our operations model is, because how that equipment works impacts how we operate in the parking lot. It impacts whether we need staffing and how much staffing we need. It impacts how the customer interfaces with the system, whether it's more of a high touch, staff system versus a self-service system. What are the self-service options? How do those work? Do you need a ticket to get in and out of the parking lot? What's the role of license plate recognition? So all of those questions we're now starting to have to think about and have to answer, with our goal, again, of developing requirements for a new system that we can then use to go and purchase that equipment. So as we start to get that process started, we wanted to come to this committee to receive your advice on how we can ensure that that the system that we procure and the system that we implement in our operations remain accessible to the greatest community of people as possible, what you would like to see in a system going forward. We can't promise that we're able to get everything because we're dependent on what the market offers, but what would you like to see? What sort of things would you advise us to take a look at? What sort of things would you advise us against, again, in order to create a more accessible parking system? So I don't have a presentation beyond that. I'm just here to hear from the committee and to get your advice on this matter.
Thank you for that. I have one quick question, first of all. You said it might be a couple of years before you actually get the system installed, so there's no rush on this suggestions, correct?
Chair Marston, committee members, there's no rush. Yes, it is going to be a lengthy process. However, our goal for this year, this fiscal year, so before next July, is to go into the procurement process, so to issue a request for proposals. Okay. So in order to do that, we need to figure out what are the functional requirements that the system needs to meet. So this is the time that we're sort of defining what we want to see in a future system.
Okay. Chair Marston, if I could suggest, sounds like a perfect opportunity for another ad hoc committee, rather than trying to decide it as a committee of the whole.
That would be good, I think. But I still have I think some of us have suggestions.
No, absolutely.
And then I have to work with you in the future.
And we expect that we'll be back in the future as we get further along in the process. Okay. But this is sort of the opening of the conversation with this group.
Mr. Rasser, are you wanting to be on an ad hoc?
No, but I'd be happy to make a motion to create one.
Okay.
You already got me on one today. So.
Okay.
I wonder if it would be appropriate for an existing ad hoc to address this.
There's a parking one, right?
The blue curb parking. It may be slightly mislabeled in this context, but we do have a ad hoc committee dealing with accessible parking on street. Why not look at it off street as well?
Agreed.
Just call it the parking committee.
Yeah.
Let's just rename it and expand, what's under that purview.
Yeah,
And it comes
accessible
back to the
parking.
committee, comes back to the full committee.
Yep.
Regardless, I'd be in favor of that.
Yeah, me too.
So moved.
Second.
All right. Suzanne Tejada,
Yes.
Michael Rasler,
Yes.
Karen Luckett,
Yes.
Nick Kuntz,
Yes.
Skylar Kovich.
Yeah, I'm sorry. So we're voting on the motion to add this item to what the parking committee already does, right? Not to create another one.
I think
Is that
I
correct?
understand that the motion is to change the name of the existing parking committee and allow it to address these issues with downtown parking.
Okay, yeah, I vote yes then. Sorry.
Chair James Marston.
Yes. All right. Well, I have a couple suggestions, but I'm going to wait for the other people first on what it is that what we need to have in our new, better system.
I'm going to have to excuse myself, though, for another commitment. I'm
Okay.
sorry. Thank you.
Do you have any?
No, I'm going to hold them for the
Okay.
process.
All right. Thank you, Michael.
So, Ms. Gorman, I appreciate your time and your engaging us. I'm going to remain optimistic that we have better results than the last time. Your predecessor came to us with the suggestion to go fully automated and gave us assurances that it would all be very accessible, and that didn't happen. So I trust that this process will work out better this time around. I don't know what advice to give you now because I don't know what our options are, but I can tell you that the most frustrating barrier to accessibility in the current system is having to pull the ticket out of the machine. So I think anything we can do that leads us towards a touch-free system will, whether that's license plate readers, whether that's near-field communication, whether that's interfacing with a handheld device, or maybe, a city-issued RFID card that can be waved at an RFID reader. Any of those things that minimize the need to manipulate a ticket dispenser, I think that will be a huge improvement.
I hate you, Nick. You stole all my ideas.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good, let's go to lunch.
Okay. A lot of places do have the app for your iPhone or something, but that doesn't affect everybody. So I hope we don't have to go with that because that's great for most people. But if you don't have your phone or it's dead or you don't have the technology, we don't want that. But a ticketless system would be great. And the LPRs could just look at people who have said, hey, I have a handicap sticker, and here's my license plate. Let me in without having to do anything would be great. And Nick's other ideas with the RFID, the near-field readers, all those things, I think are very, very important. And some kind of way to get a human help. I mean, I know the move to get rid of the valet guys or the operators, kiosk guys. I understand the economics of that, but people have really liked the fact that you could go to, as a visitor or as a confused person, you could go to a parking garage and get a person to help you, whether where's the shopping at, where's the next liquor store, whatever you want to know, those guys could help. So something to have a phone number to get somebody would be great, but I don't, those are the thoughts I had, same as Nick's. Anyone else have any suggestions for Ms. Clark? I will say that I did try to get Dan Henchy to increase or put in there to raise the rental fees for the parklets, so I don't know if it could come up to city council again. I was very sad that they lowered the amount that you wanted, so.
We do appreciate that. Thank you. With a little plug.
I personally feel betrayed by my representative for lowering that fee. There's so many expenses with the administrative overhead that the excuse for failing to provide accessibility is we don't have the resources. And we, at the first opportunity to fund the resources, they went the other way.
You just don't matter. Does anyone else have any help for Ms. Clark? We appreciate you doing this, but without knowing what's out there, we can't give you a lot of feedback, but please keep us posted, and you do have this same committee you could deal with.
Yes, Chair Marston, and for the benefit of the committee, I understand. The thing is, there's a really wide variety of things that are out there. And so as we start to engage the ad hoc committee, we can provide some of those examples. But at this point, we're kind of doing some blue sky visioning. So
Right.
just, if you had your druthers in a perfect world, what would things look like? We may not be able to get there, but, we know what we want to aim for. So we do appreciate the input of this committee.
Automatic entry, I think, is very important. Without any thing going on with the driver.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess one last thing for the, if a smartphone app is an option, definitely trying to beta test it to make sure that people with various accessibility settings on the phone can actually use the app.
Thank you.
We may not have many blind drivers, but certainly plenty of blind co-pilots, right?
Right. Or, various, like there are people who use low vision settings who still drive. And, of course, people who are not touching the phone with their arms, all kinds of things that might come up.
Thank you, the committee member Marston, Chair Marston, committee members. That's a really good suggestion. We do have a mobile payment option now, so it's not actually an app, but you can scan the barcode on your ticket to pay using your phone. So we'll go back and we'll talk to our vendor and we'll make sure that they've done that sort of testing. I know we had to do a lot of testing to get it up and running, and I'll make sure that those different accessibility systems and visibility systems have been checked as well.
One more tool that I forgot to mention, just came to mind, is QR codes. I think I've seen automated parking systems that are QR code driven.
Sometimes hard to find the code.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ms. Clark, is yours a QR system, or is it really just a barcode?
Chair Marston, so ours is, QR codes, barcodes is sort of a similar thing.
That's what I
So,
thought, yeah.
Yeah, ours is, so it's based on the ticket itself, which is read by the column when you put it in. But because we also have the license plate recognition, it's kind of both. So it takes the picture of your license plate when you come in. When you also pull that ticket, it attaches. So basically every transaction gets kind of a unique ID number. So the system attaches your license plate to that transaction number, and
Okay.
it knows what time you came in, and it knows that you actually drove into the parking lot rather than backing out of the parking lot. So then when you go to exit, it scans your license plate. Provided it gets a good read, it can use that to retrieve that unique credential that it assigned you on entry.
Okay.
And then it uses your entry time to calculate your fees due. So it's not exactly, you could represent that credential with a barcode or with a QR code or something like that, but right now that's how the system works. It's sort of assigning that credential when the person comes in via both a ticket and the license plate.
Okay, because some of the private lots in town, they just have a QR code on a big sign, and you take a picture. Now, do any of your surface lots have that, just a QR sign that you take a picture of?
No, we don't. That is a technology that you're seeing more and more with, usually it's used in like more of a prepaid parking sort of situation, like on street or something like that, or what we call a pay on foot, which is where if you've used the waterfront lots, where you have a pay station, you have to go up and you've got to, punch in, I want to stay for 3 hours, and then you pay for 3 hours, and then you put that on your dash. Usually that's how those QR systems go. So rather than actually going to a machine and entering your information, you scan it and you use your mobile phone to enter that information. Usually you connect it to your license plate so that whoever's on the other side knows that that vehicle is paid. So that is, we could look at whether or not we wanted to move to pay on foot as opposed to, right now where you pay at exit. We also will certainly be looking at, regardless of how the entrances and exits change, providing self-service kiosks in the parking lot, so that rather than paying at the column or using the attendant at exit, you can go to the kiosk before you leave and, either license plate, ticket, QR code, whatever we're using at that point, make your payment there before you get to your vehicle.
Okay. My question was more like for my own knowledge. I wasn't suggesting that we have that QR code being used, but
There is a code on the ticket now that you scan with your phone if you want to use the mobile payment option.
does anyone else have any suggestions?
Quick related question for Mr. Diamore. Can you please inquire with the waterfront department as to the end of life for the existing kiosks down there? Because that whole system was installed without proper accessibility, and I'm hoping that this process may lead to a better solution that may someday be adopted by the waterfront.
Yeah, I'm happy to check on that, and I am curious, I don't know, Ms. Clark, have you coordinated with Waterfront? Because when opportunities like this come up, we often do check in with other departments who are working on similar things.
Mr. Damore and Chair Marston, committee members, we do coordinate pretty closely with the waterfront department. We're not exactly on the same schedule as they are. Their equipment is a bit newer than ours is, but until this point, all three major city parking operations, so airport, waterfront, and downtown, have all used the same park system. We've all used a company called Ski Data because it was beneficial to us to have one point of contact for service. It would make, we're obviously a smaller town. We don't have major parking companies based here. So, it sort of ensured that there would be a tech who, they would be motivated to send up to assist us. And, sometimes we can swap parts if that's what we need to do. However, the airport has recently reached an agreement to move over to a new system, so they'll be moving to a company called TIBA fairly soon. We're interested to see how that goes. The waterfront also actually uses two different systems. So they're gated systems, where I forget what they call it. I think it's Harbor West?
Well, it's the wharf.
Yeah. Yes, so Wharf and Harbor Main are gated systems where they do use Ski Data, but the two parking lots where there are pay and display or pay on foot, that uses a system called T2. So they're actually on two separate systems down there.
Is it possible that staff could provide the committee with the names of those different systems so that we could do a little bit of research into what each system provides and doesn't? I understand the benefit to sticking with a provider, and it may be that the existing provider has the technology that we might desire, and maybe the existing systems could be upgraded with new modules, and I'd just like to better understand all those options.
Sure, Chair Marston, Committee Member Kuntz, I will work through Mr. Damore to provide a list of some of the larger parks vendors to the committee. I'll just note that if you're not familiar with the industry, that's going to be a little bit difficult to fully understand what sort of is out there, because a lot of those providers offer many different options from full-scale gated all the way down to a very simple either pay on display or pay by phone, kind of unstaffed. And so it's a pretty big range. But I will plan, again, when we first interface with the subcommittee, to give everybody kind of a briefer and some background on sort of the state of the industry and what kinds of different options there are out there. So we'll happily get you that information so you can start doing some research.
Thank you.
Thanks. Could you please just spell out the name of the system that the airport is getting?
Sure, that is TIBA, T-I-B-A.
T-I-B-A. Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Appreciate your time. Anyone have a question? Are we done? I guess I
And
will
check on
call.
public comment, right?
There are no public comments.
We wore them out.
Okay. I will call the meeting to adjournment. Thank you all.